Do you see what happened? Iran went to war partly to break out of the petrodollar cage. It leaves the war back inside it, and this time by signature, not by sanction. This is the trap, and it is an old one dressed up in a new language. The same article in the deal says, "We will unfreeze your assets," is the article that confirms whose system those assets live in. Do you Let me tell you a story, not about missiles or bombers or the men who died in a war that lasted 111 days. I want to tell you a story about money, about a single piece of paper signed at the Palace of Versailles on June 18th, 2026, and why I think almost everyone reading it got the story backwards. Here is what the headlines said: Iran wins the peace. America blinked. After 111 days of war, after the United States spent over $36 billion, after gas prices crept toward $4 a gallon, after bombers flew from Missouri and a supreme leader was killed, the United States sat down and gave Iran almost everything it asked for: frozen assets unfrozen, oil exports waved back into the global market, a $300 billion reconstruction fund, even Iran's nuclear program, bruised but not dismantled, allowed to stand at the status quo. Critics called it a humiliation. Analysts said Tehran had out-negotiated Washington. I want to ask you to slow down because I think there is a second story hiding inside the first one. And to see it, you need to understand something most people never think about: how oil actually gets paid for. Let me take you back to 1974, 3 years after President Nixon severed the dollar from gold. President Nixon sent his Treasury Secretary William Simon and his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger on a quiet mission to sit across from Saudi Arabia's King Faisal. What emerged from that room reshaped the modern world. The United States offered military protection for the House of Saud, advanced weapons, and help building the kingdom's infrastructure. In return, Saudi Arabia made three promises: it would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars, it would pressure the rest of OPEC to do the same, and this is the part that turned a trade deal into an empire. It would take the enormous river of dollars flowing in from oil sales and reinvest them straight back into US government treasuries. This was a masterstroke. The dollar, no longer backed by gold, was now backed by something far larger. Every drop of oil moving through every engine, every factory, every power plant on earth. It gave the US a permanent trillion-dollar lender, and it gave the world a job no other currency had: the only acceptable currency for the most essential commodity on the planet. That is the petrodollar. It didn't just fuel cars, it fueled an empire. Now, hold that story on your mind and let's go back to Versailles. Because while the world was watching missiles and bombers, Iran was quietly fighting on a second battlefield, one most viewers never saw. In March 2026, with the Strait of Hormuz under its control, Iran began telling tanker captains, "You may pass, but only if you price your oil in Chinese yuan." Chinese tankers sailed through unimpeded while American-linked vessels were turned away. Iranian officials confirmed it openly. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel, and the world watched something it had never quite seen: a direct public challenge to the dollar's 50-year monopoly on oil, happening at the most important choke point in the global energy system. It didn't stop there. Iran had spent years quietly building financial bridges to Russia and China, linking its Shitab payment uh, network to Russia's MIR system, piloting a digital real, joining a blockchain settlement platform with Russia and China that needed no American banks at all. Iran's own ambassador to the BRICS bloc said the quiet part out loud that Iran and Russia were building a shared currency free of Washington's reach, and that over 60% of trade between the two countries already moved in rubles and reals. No dollars required. For a moment, in spring 2026, it looked like Iran was doing something no American adversary had managed in 50 years, cracking the petrodollar system open at the very place it was born. This was where international relations theory earns its keep, because there is a name for what Iran was attempting: asymmetric warfare. When a weaker power cannot beat a stronger power on the battlefield, so it changes the battlefield entirely. Sun Tzu, a Chinese master, taught this 25 centuries ago. The wisest strategy avoids the enemy's strength and finds what it cannot defend. The American military could not be defeated in the air, but the dollar's dominance, assumed for 50 years and never seriously tested at its source, that was a different kind of target. Iran was trying to win the war. It was trying to crack the foundation beneath it. So ask yourself, when the United States sat down at Versailles, what was it actually negotiating? Read the Memorandum of Understanding closely, not the headlines about it, but actual text, and a quieter, more careful pattern appears. Every single financial benefit Iran receives in this deal is routed through one machine and one machine only: the American Treasury and the American banking system. The document doesn't say Iran may now sell oil freely in any currency through any channel. It says the US Treasury will issue waivers, meaning Washington's own Department of State Finance is the one granting permission. It says those waivers cover banking transactions, insurance, and transportation, meaning the system being unlocked in is the dollar-dominated correspondent banking system Iran had been trying to escape. The frozen funds aren't simply released into Iranian hands. The deal says they become available for payment to any ultimate beneficiary designated by the Central Bank of Iran, with the United States itself issuing all necessary licenses to make that happen. Even the $300 billion reconstruction fund is not gold, not Yuan, not blockchain wallet. It is a fund built, administered, and licensed inside the very system the deal claims to be easing Iran out from under. And notice what is missing entirely. We who read the full draft we can point something striking in it. The agreement is completely silent on cryptocurrency and digital settlement, the very tools Iran had been using to dodge sanctions for years. There is no mention of Yuan, no mention of Rubles, no mention of the BRICS payment bridges, the Shitab mirror linkage, the digital real. None of it survived into the final text. Um, the entire framework, as one would say, runs through monitored banking channels, oil export permissions, and frozen asset releases. The traditional architecture resorted, not replaced. Do you see what happened? Iran went to war partly to break out of the petrodollar cage. It leaves the war back inside it. and this time by signature, not by sanction. This is the trap, and it is an old one dressed up in a new language. The same article in the deal says, "We will unfreeze your assets," is the article that confirms whose system those assets live in. The same provision that says we will let your oil flow is the provision that confirms those banks that oil money must pass through. Every dollar of relief Iran receives is a dollar that must at some point touch an American regulated channel, which means every dollar of relief is also forever a dollar America can freeze again. That is not a footnote, that is entire history of US-Iran sanctions in one sentence. Iran has lived this before. Saudi Arabia, the uh, founder of the petrodollar bargain in 1974, lives with this same vulnerability today, deeply enriched by the system and just as deeply exposed to it, because the whole loop runs through American banks. So, who won the deal? I think the honest answer requires time frames, not one. In the short run, Iran's economy breathes again, oil flows, assets move, reconstruction fund is promised, that is real and it matters enormously to ordinary Iranians waiting for relief. But in the long run, the more consequential battle, the one fought not with missiles but with currencies, the one Iran had actually started to win in March at Hormuz, with Yuan priced goals and Chinese tankers sailing free. The battle quietly ended at Warsaw, not with a defeat Iran could see, with a signature it had little choice but to give. The missile stopped on June 18, but the petrodollar, bruised, tested, talked about more seriously than at any point in 50 years, held. And in the long story of how empires sustain themselves, that may turn out to be the only battle that ever really mattered.